Welcome! Today we are going to be stitching the French knot in our purple stripe for our Be Kind rainbow hoop here. We're going to be using 6 strands, all 6 strands of 33, and I'm going to start on this corner, and I recommend you do the same so that you can anchor your floss on the back to these stitches here and then not have a knot in the way when you start stitching. So let's learn how to make a French knot. I'm going to come up right here in the corner, and then I'm going to make a circle with my floss. So my floss goes from my left hand around to my right hand. If you were left-handed, you would do this the other direction, all right? So circle with my floss around to the needle. Then I'm going to take my floss and wrap it one time around the needle. Then I like to hold this out of my way with my finger so that I can go back into the fabric. And I want to go into the fabric on the inside of the shape because the knot's going to have some width to it, and if I make it on the line, it's going to cover up our gap. So our needle needs to be inside our shape. Then I'm going to slide my thread down to the fabric, and then I'm going to hold this tail out of the way while I then pull my thread all the way down and through. And that is your French knot. Now I'm going to work around the outside first so that I don't have any little funny gaps along the outside that I feel compelled to put a knot in, because that can sometimes mess with how straight or not our line looks. So I'm going to come up just right next to this knot. You can see I'm not moving it at all with my needle, just a little bit. I'm not scooching it out of the way. So I'll pull the thread up, I make a circle, left hand through to my right hand, wrap one time around, hold the knot out of the way, go down into the fabric, again, making sure you're on the inside of the shape, and we also don't want to be using the same hole we used to come up with. So it's a different hole. Then I slide my floss down to the fabric, I hold the end out of the way, and pull this down. Now, you'll probably find that as you make these knots, you're going to want to set your hoop down so that you can hold your floss as you wrap it around to, oh, I caught a blue end. Let me hopefully catch it. Nope, okay, that's fine. You're going to want to set your hoop down as you wrap and then put your needle back in. And then probably you'll pick it up as you hold the thread out of the way to pull your knot back down. Let's see if I can hide this blue. If not, I will trim it out later with my super sharp scissors, which are not right here next to me. So again, coming up, one wrap back into the fabric, and then pull down. Now, French knots, the more times you wrap the floss around the knot, it gets bigger, but it also is going to get taller. Depending on how you pull the floss down, it tends to like to stack and make taller knots a little bit more than wider knots. So if you want to make a wider knot, a bigger knot to take up more space, I recommend using more strands of floss as opposed to just wrapping the floss around the needle more times. From about 1 to 3 wraps is what I use most all of the time. And there definitely is a width difference in 1, 2, and 3 wraps, but between like 3 and 4 or 3 and 5 wraps, that's where I begin to see more of the height difference than width difference. Now, since you are wrapping your thread around your needle, your thread is going to begin to twist on itself. So when you're putting your needle in from the back, see if I can show you on the front. Nope. It's usually from the back that I feel it first. If you feel your thread or see your thread start to twist in on itself and make a corkscrew of twisted thread, what you're gonna do is you're just gonna hold your hoop in one hand and you're gonna let your needle hang straight down from the hoop and untwist like an old school phone cord, right? Hopefully most of us are old enough to remember when you would hold by the cord and that phone would just spin and spin and spin until it's unwound. Same thing. You're just gonna let your needle hang from the hoop and let that floss unwind. And you'll find it's much easier to make knots again after that. If you try and make knots with twisted thread, it becomes much harder to pull through from the top. Right about here, this is when tangled thread becomes a problem. It starts to catch and pull and mess with your knots. So I'm going to keep making French knots here, and then we'll check in a little bit. All right, I've made it to about the end of my floss here. You can see I have probably 3 times-ish the length of my needle, and I can just wrap it around comfortably, but not much more. So this is going to be my last knot on this strand of floss, and then I'm going to start a new one and continue making knots down around the edge. Okay, I've made it all the way around the edge, and then this is where the magic happens. As we begin to fill in the center, any of your little mistakes, any of the knots that are uneven, they're going to start to magically disappear into this fabulous texture that is French knots, which is why I love to fill in a shape with French knots as a way to learn them, because your mistakes disappear. It's not like you're trying to make one perfect French knot to be a flower or the dot on an eye or something. All you're doing here is making a texture. So if you focus on consistency and keeping your knots inside the shape, the rest magically becomes part of the texture and is no longer something that stands out. So I'm going to keep making knots all along here. And then as I get to this one knot, you can see this one, he didn't go the same direction as his friends. I'm going to try to get a knot close to it so that it pushes the knot up there like that you can see. So I'm going to try and get a knot under it to push it out of the way. And if that doesn't work and I still have a little bobble in my edge, I could come back with less strands of floss on my needle and make a teeny tiny knot to fill in the extra space. And I'm hoping I won't have to do that. Just know you've got options if you need them. As you come up through the center, in between those two edges of knots, just make sure that your needle is not catching any of the knots as you pull up. You want to make sure that you're pulling up actually in between them into open fabric rather than through a knot. It is possible to come up through a knot and then make a knot next to it, but it is not recommended. So just make sure you're coming up under, between the knots in open fabric. And then just trust in the process and keep practicing, and you're gonna do awesome. Happy stitching.